Hey everybody, I just wanted to give an update on how the progress I made and how I ended up with my SAGA terrain. And so I have finished the terrain that I set out to do. I wanted to capture, I guess, most of the kinds of terrain that would be featured from the main rulebook. A future book called the Book of Battles are supposed to provide buildings and things like that, and I have some buildings that I've shown on the channel, but it is possible I'll need to do some more terrain for SAGA as well. But for now, these are the pieces of terrain that I've made. The only piece that's considered to be a large piece of terrain is the forest that's in the center. And so I'll show the forests first. So I have 3 sort of wood here. 2 of them are considered to be small terrain. And then 1 of them is a large piece of terrain, which you're only really supposed to have 1 large piece from a footprint perspective on the board when you have 1 of those. So I can actually, for the most part, just remove the trees here. Some are a little tighter than others, but they're all actually fairly doable. And they fit nice and snug for the most part. They don't fall over real easily. But I do actually have a variety of trees, so I could put some of the lighter colored ones if I want. But the main thing with being able to pull the trees out was so I could actually move guys through them, particularly with these small ones, and put them in there without issues of bending trees and destroying flock and things like that. So pretty happy to have these. Whenever I've used my Woodland Scenic trees on my bases I've made for musket and tomahawks, not the tree canopy, but my other stuff, I've always had to fiddle with my hands through the trees, and for SAGA in particular, I kind of thought I wanted to just do something a little bit different. And so, yeah, these I'm pretty happy with these. I do like my tree canopy for musket and tomahawks just because I like the feel of being in the woods, and it's not... The way terrain is handled is a little bit different in that game. So I also have a ruin here, and I've put out some miniatures here just for scale and perspective. I did actually use some ivy on and moss on the ruin. And yeah, I was pretty happy with that came out, just to show a ruin, and that is a small base for SAGA. I have some rocky ground. I have some sheep here to illustrate the rocky ground. And so this, as many of you may remember, was all epoxy sculpt. And then lastly, the one I had the most trouble with, but in some ways I do like it though, some of the things that I did on it was the swamps. Bogs, I guess, and swamps. This is still a little wet. This is MDF. On all of these I've used MDF, and I have had problems in the past. I guess I didn't quite remember it, but when putting the polyurethane in, because the MDF is porous, it did have a tendency to keep seeping through and not really remaining level. What I should have done in retrospect is actually use the epoxy sculpt and made an impermeable well that I could just put it in, and then it wouldn't have seeped through. And so once I saw I get the look that I like, and for those of you that remember, I did my river boards, which were a type of resin, I believe, but it was an impermeable material where I used a very thin coat of Minwax polyurethane quick drying on it, and I love the way it looked. It's nice and shiny. It can be, in certain applications, really nice to work with. When I wasn't getting where I needed to with this, I ended up filling it with Woodland Scenic water effects, which then if you put it on too thick, it just ends up white. I've used the Woodland Scenic water effects thin on things, and it works out really great too. And so in the end, what I ended up doing, and these are still a little wet, is just painting them darker brown in the middle, just to sort of show swamp. There are a number of things I could have done to mitigate this. It just didn't work out. It was a bit of a learning experience. So I may put a little bit of a thin coat of the polyurethane on the brown to make it a little shinier, possibly. For the Tufts of Grass, I ended up taking a brush, and this was kind of interesting. I never did this before, but I took the brush, and I actually, on the top of the brush, the painter's brush, I used hot glue on the ends and just sort of smeared it on. And then once it dried, I would cut it and then just trim the hot glue down, and I made my own sort of tall grass. And I honestly never saw anybody do it that way. It's really common sense, and I'm sure somebody's thought of doing that before, but I was kind of trying to think of how I wanted to do this tall grass, and I just thought of doing it that way. Just take the hot glue and just put the hot glue on the ends, and then just cut the other ends, and there you go, instant big pieces of tufts of tall grass in your swamps. And so I've got 2 of them here, and I think these will turn out pretty good to be using for swamps. They're actually both, you can use 2 of them, so that's why I did 2, and they're both small in this case, and so they're not like a large piece of terrain. So for now, I think I'm actually pretty well positioned. I've got some houses, like I mentioned, that I've used in the past. And I have my tower that I can use for fantasy in this. But I think for SAGA, this positions me pretty good for most of what I'll need. I do have some cut pieces of, if you just want like grass field, you know, I have like cut pieces of the straw mat that I can use for that, and that works out pretty well. And I have a river, but there isn't really right now a river scenario, and there is in the old book, but not in the new book. But I've got everything for the current rules that I pretty much think I'm going to need. And like other people have mentioned, this stuff can be used for other games too. But SAGA is actually, depending on how much of a stickler you are in trying to play by the rules, because it does lend to competitive play for a miniatures game kind of well, in my opinion. I do kind of one of the terrain pieces to fit within the scale dimensions that they ask for, and it's part of the game design in the sense that they only give you a certain size board, and you know, like there's a bunch of moving parts in the rule set, and they want the terrain pieces to be within the framework of a certain configuration, and so that's as far as width and length and things, maximums, and so that's what I tried to do just to kind of keep it together as far as with the rules. Alright. Well, that is the end of this little project. I didn't do a big series like I said I was going to, but I have shown some updates along the way for those of you that follow the channel. And yeah, hope everybody's having a good one. Talk to you later.